Welcome to This New Idea. I'm the host of this chatcast, Conrad Myers, and I would love to welcome my guest of this episode, Ranu Mukherjee, joining me live from studio in... where is your studio, Ranu?
It's in the dog patch.
Oh, in the dog patch. That's right.
San Francisco, yeah.
That's right. Is it the same place that I visited many years ago off of... not too far off of 3rd Street?
I don't know. It's on the corner. It's near the corner of 23rd and 3rd, and it's in a domestic building.
Yes. No, that's...
Like,
yeah.
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 Same place.
I was there a while ago. A long while ago.
Cool.
Thanks for talking to me. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, I've admired your work for a really long time, and especially I think we met just as you were getting into animation more. I think you were just starting to attach yourself to that as a parallel to your painting practice.
Yeah. You put some work in your show.
Yeah, long ago. The whatever that was. Yeah, early aggregate space shows.
Early aggregate space, yeah.
But also just like I've gone on to teach a bunch of animation and have brought your work up as ways to do animation in lieu of really digging into stop motion and
Right.
kind of animation as collage and After Effects with animation. And it's always been really, people always are blown away by the complexity of your work and the excitement. And then once I show them the techniques, they're always so excited that it's something that's tangible, that it's
It's actually not that complicated.
I mean, it is, but it isn't. Like the technology part of it isn't complicated, but the way you're choosing to enact kind of the breaking apart of things and the reassembly of things, especially at the pace with which you kind of your work always, at least the animation, the few that I can think of, moved at almost a snail's pace, and that the way in which things came together wasn't really fully understood, and by the time they came together, you often were already on to like the next thing that's coming together, so you don't perceive time. And when I reached out to you about subjects that you wanted to talk about, although you didn't list time as an issue, you did use the word time like a half dozen times in your reply. And
Right, yeah.
and I love that it's not necessarily on your mind, but it's so beneath everything that's on your mind right now.
Yes, right now, definitely, but always. I mean, I think I see even painting as like a time-based practice.
Uh-huh.
So I think that it's really at the center of what I try to do, because the work is always about how things change over time and
Mhm.
how time works with the body and the capacity to feel time, which I think is a really important thing that is easy to forget in the kind of culture that we live in.
Yeah.
Normal. Right now, it's actually right on top of us, this thing.
Yeah.
This really good friend of mine recently talked about time as, during COVID, as chewing gum. So, like, sometimes it's super stretchy and malleable, and other times it's like this hard ball,
Oh, wow.
which I think is, like, so concise. Like, it describes what's going on right now.
Yeah, I was looking for. I think the problem with me. So this week, I usually try to dig up a quote and use it to interject in the conversation. Usually at the end of the conversation, and I could not find this quote, and I think it's because I was obsessed with finding this Brian Greene quote. He's a astrophysicist and a writer about string theory, and he had this quote in one of his books about really talking through why time doesn't have a definition, and how there's no reason that it exists linearly in mathematics, and that it's really hard to comprehend. But then he kind of goes on to talk about all the reasons why it physically makes sense with what we know about the universe. and it's really difficult to read and think about. But just the fact that like time is a quite possibly the linearness of time is a human construct, and
Right.
again, I love that you're
Yeah.
yeah, right. You're the fact that you just went there with it felt really good. So my apologies that I couldn't find that quote. I'll have to I'll email it to you when I dig it up, and maybe I'll
Oh,
post
if
it
you
in
find it, definitely send it to me.
I'll post it in the YouTube comment or in the YouTube link as well for those of us that are paying attention to such things.
Yeah.
But yeah, right. It's a funny phenomena that's happening where some days I feel like I look at the clock and it's already 4 o'clock, like today, and other days I look at the clock and it's like 9:30, and it's like I don't really know based on the amount of projects and the types of projects that I'm doing. I'm not in any routine, and so then all the things I've come to expect are out the window, and my body just doesn't know when it is ever.
Right. Right. Yeah. You don't know when it is. I think I find also there's a lot of I mean, I've been contacted by so many people that I haven't seen in like 20 years or heard from in 20 years, even like people to do projects.
Oh
And so
wow.
there's like this weird thing happening where there's just a return of a lot of conversations that had been sort of in suspended animation or something for
Uh
a
huh.
while. I think that might be happening to a lot of people. I don't know. But I heard I was listening to City Arts and Lectures the other night, which was this Rebecca Solnit and Britt Marling
Uh
conversation.
huh.
And they started talking about elliptical writing, which I really related to. I was like, oh, that's such a good model for me to think about in terms of thinking about time as being like an ellipse
Uh huh.
that like returns on itself at some point, you know, if I understand the geometry of that. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think a lot of artists have. This has come up in episodes of this new idea before. The idea of returning to work without intending to, and that when you start to look in your archive as an artist, you start to find these pinpoints of ideas that you branched off on that you don't recall making that active decision, but
Mm-hmm.
a spare part or a extra idea that spilled out of an original piece then became a whole series of other work that reference it, but only indirectly and only because you're the person that used that scrap to build this new piece, part of your practice upon,
Yeah.
and how it it's something that happens to every artist, and I mean I think it happens to everybody outside of their life, of like the thing, like the underlying content to to your life that just kind of keeps bubbling up to the surface through
Following up. Yeah.
whatever you're working on.
Yeah.
So I guess as a segue, what are you working on? Tell us about what are your projects right now?
Okay. I am doing a few different things right now. And I usually do this. I usually work on different things at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But physically, so one thing that's really unique about this moment for me is that I'm on sabbatical.
Uh huh.
And I've never had a sabbatical from teaching before.
Oh, okay.
So this period of time was supposed to be really different in that I was going to be in LA for the whole month of April. I was supposed to be at Montalvo Center for the Arts for the month of March, and
Mm-hmm.
I was there when all this started.
Uh huh.
So I kind of started this residency and then ended up having to leave, but met a whole bunch of people like that I had never met before. All these artists from all over the world at the moment that this was happening. So that was kind of an amazing experience. But then when I came back, I had rented my studio out. So once the person who was renting it left, I was able to come back here because nobody else is here.
Mm. Oh, right.
And I have found, so what I'm really working on physically are a body of paintings, and the reason that that's been really satisfying is that I can't seem to get myself to make animation right now,
Mm-hmm.
even though I have projects that I could be working on. I don't want to be working on the computer any more than I have to, because my whole all of our social things
Right.
are and I don't know. So I'm really enjoying making these paintings, which are they're kind of made in layers, and I'm working with printed fabric. So luckily, I printed a bunch of fabric before I started this body of work. And so I've been making those, and I think they're really related to speculative fiction, to ideas about, in some ways there's sort of elements of them that are a little bit more personal than some of my work. I've started to think that I have triplets that are 13 now.
Right.
And I've started to actually think I probably need to understand like how motherhood has affected me, or not affected me, but I think of motherhood in a way that has to do with this really expansive kind of thing that's related to futurism. And I've always been really interested in speculative fiction and futurisms, and how we think about the future from the present. So not being, like, how do you connect into the present to understand what the future might be saying to us? And so if you have, now that I have kids that are 13, they've been starting to go to like climate marches, and, there's a way in which the plight of the children at the border of the United States really crushes me. I mean, I know it's upsetting to a lot of people, and beyond, being donating bits of money or whatever. There's something where I think that the kind of notion of the way that the notion of motherhood sort of connects you into this idea of futurity in a different way. And then also, I've been working with the figure of the banyan tree and other kind of non-human elements as protagonists in my work recently. And so that's something that's continuing, but I'm also, and I don't, you were asking about ideas that I don't really know how to talk about.
Yes.
And this about motherhood is definitely one of them, because I feel like it just is something that people don't talk about.
Right.
Or if it's talked about, it's talked about in a really domestic way. And it's also, I don't like the argument between women about whether we should or should not have kids. I don't think we should be judging ourselves based on that. It's not necessarily about the fact of being a mother, as it is about the idea that I've also been inhabiting this state that might have awoken me to certain kinds of things.
Right.
I also having triplets and being pregnant with triplets was, I always thought that science fiction prepared me for that experience,
Right.
Like the capacity of the body. And the capacity of the body is certainly like in all of the work I'm making. Yeah. So this is something that I think is happening with the work that I don't know how to describe exactly. But again, in that same Rebecca Solnit conversation with Britt Marling, she was talking about being mothered by things other than people. And that was really related to what I'm talking about, which is that, there's a sort of way that there's a connectivity of entities or something, whether they're human or not, that has something to do with what I'm talking about. So all of that to say, I don't know how to talk about this, and it's embarrassing.
No, right? It's not. No, that's what this is all about.
It's like also the thing that like artists get really cringy about talking about motherhood, and then there's this, but then the other part of me is like wanting to just really be in the face of this idea that you can't be a mother and a successful artist at the same time, which is, I mean, I've had a lot of moments. In the beginning, because when I had the kids, I was also in a major transition from like working as part of a collective group for my whole practice to moving into having an individual practice. Right. And so now I do both, but when I had them, oh shoot, it's actually working, Conrad. I've totally lost my train of thought.
Yes. Well, okay. Well, so let me.
Oh no, I know what I was gonna say. When I had them, I was thinking, I am now like actually trying to do the impossible. Like you can't be a mother of triplets and reinvent your whole career and start again. Yeah. So yeah, I've had a lot of those feelings, and I'm sure that other artists do. And so I want to push against that a lot.
Yeah. I
without saying that you have to have kids or something ridiculous like that. You know what I
right.
mean? That's not what I'm talking about at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so I mean, just as a quick segue, do you know Megan Wynn's work? She's a video artist that makes a large portion of her work about her child, and it was originally a performance artist, and then started incorporating their daughter into their performance work. But a lot of it exists online and in small videos. And I originally encountered the work where she and her husband were using the puppeteering. She was her husband wasn't involved. I don't think was puppeteering the baby's mouth and saying mean things, which is really really amusing. But it's gone on to like many other iterations, and they're all really incredible. Anyway, it is a like a deep challenge and celebration of motherhood, but also kind of really points out like hypocrisies and how we view it, and it's a very very funny work. But I think it's the same sort of thing of like struggling with not again struggling is the wrong word, of embracing what the role of motherhood has done to their practice while still maintaining a positive practice and addressing these heavy new set of criteria with which the whole world is now viewed through.
Right, like and for me, it's like understanding how to even talk about it, because I don't. It's not always appearing in a way that's totally legible. I mean, in some pieces it is, but not
Right.
always. So yeah, and how to understand the link between what I'm talking about and some kind of like futurism thing.
Right. I love the idea of motherhood being not from a human mother. Of the idea of like even digital mentorship, or finding yourself. I talk a lot about this with my partner Willis, and like how we ended up here in this place doing the things that we're doing, because
Right.
we're quite far from where we started,
Right. Yeah.
in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. And so both of us, like, it comes up on a daily basis as to like
Right.
how did we
How did we get here?
yeah, right. And and the I guess what's so intriguing about the way in which you're talking about it already, and I'm already kind of like lost in what sorts of questions to ask, but I love that you're tiptoeing around what it is that you're even investigating with it. And I feel like that's the most exciting part of these conversations to me, is that you know that it's affecting what you're working on, and you know that your ideas are you're actively trying to express something, but you don't yet know how to talk about it. And I feel like that's so important to being an artist, but also important to like what I love about these conversations is what does it mean? Like, do you need to even explain it? Do you need to talk about
exactly. I mean, what happened with I was also like on the when the quarantine happened and everything changed, I was in the middle of trying. I was supposed to be working on a text with somebody was writing about this work, because it was supposed to be in a show in the fall. And so I was in the middle of like making the work or starting to make I was like making the work, but also trying to write about it, and it was really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like I just, and then now I don't have to do that. So I don't have to write about it. But I was having this conversation with my friend, the chewing gum friend, Greene, who's like a really great writer. She lives in London, and so we've been talking. And I was telling him about this problem, because he would understand what I was talking about, about how it's not And I realized what I said to her was, it's not that I want to say motherhood is the subject matter. It's not what the work is about. And I think we'll come back to this problem over and over again when I'm trying to write about my own work, is that, you know, there's a tendency to want to say it's about this, this, and this, and this, but like,
Right.
that's really not how I think about it. It's not the subject matter. There are all of these forces
Right.
that are kind of informing the work.
Right.
They're not what the work is about.
Yeah. Right.
You know?
What do you feel like when you choose to begin a piece, are you operating from like some like piece of imagery, some piece of writing, a sketch? Like what's your normal practice? Where does a piece come from?
It's usually images. I mean, I always start with like a bunch with paintings. I always start with a bunch of surfaces, and I start with color. I start with like, what is the environment for these paintings, and that's a color to me because I can't work on white.
Right.
And so I put down those colors on a bunch of different surfaces. So that is the very beginning. But then, you know, there are things like I've been working with this whole pile of cutout pictures of extinct birds since I did that show at the De Young, and those were video. It was an animation piece.
Yeah.
And those birds like needed to keep talking to me. And so I've been working with I'm still working with those images, and I started with the body of work I'm working on now. There's like this image that has lots of trees because of the banyan tree, and the birds are in the piece. And it's sort of evolved now where the birds are appearing as cutouts. So I'm not painting as if they were actually there. I'm painting them as their images on a surface.
Got it.
Because like during this period, I've also been like during this quarantine, I've also started to like want to make still lives, like the part of which is totally weird for me. I mean, it doesn't make any sense that I would be making still lives, and I don't even know if I should call them that.
Right.
Because I was, but I think when I was the part of the time where I was at home and I couldn't get into my studio because someone else was here, I was like in a corner making these sort of watercolor sketches and stuff of objects, things like that. And I started realizing that like spatial and tactile dimensions, I'm just longing for those.
Yeah.
Like it's there. This is actually not from a privileged position of not being sick and not being, I didn't lose a job.
Right.
The things that I'm feeling about longing have to do with those things, like the dimensions of tactile and spatial connection. And so, you know, I've started to think about like, what's the still life if the objects are floating or not able to touch each other or something like that, you know. And then the painting that I showed you, the last one I finished, is the one that you put on the picture for this show. Like that one has this image in it that I've been looking at for a really long time, which is, I've repainted it and it doesn't look exactly like the original, but the source of that, part of the source, the trees in it, is sourced from this image that was made in, I think it was 1918 by Rosa Rosa, who was one of the female Italian futurists. So like there's very few of them, and there's like a lack of tons of scholarship around them. But there are a few of them, and it's from this book. There was this big Gioni made this big project about motherhood, and I have the catalog for it, and it's this piece in the middle of that catalog, and it doesn't make any sense. Like there's no, I don't know why it's in that show exactly, but there is a whole part of it about her. And she was a mother, but she didn't talk about motherhood in her work. But she also did argue about some of the patriarchal aspects of the futurist movement, which were pretty problematic. So thinking about, I've been wanting to do something with that image for a long time, and then I made, that was like the first, so in a way that's what I'm thinking of as a still life, which is like sort of a still life, but there's a whole forest there. Right. And things are like walking out of objects.
Yeah, through them.
Right. And there's kind of, so, yeah, that's, I don't know. before, how did I get there? I don't know. I'm meandering around like how I start an image. So that
Yeah.
thing, I thought I needed to make an image with that Rosa drawing for a
Hmm.
long time and kind of recast it as a, what's futurism now sort of question.
Right.
Um,
I think I mean I think I'm just I'm trying to just like think through um your practice with you and like think
yeah,
about what that means. I mean I think like still lives are always to me no matter what represent like I only think of loneliness. Like I think it's really difficult for me to have that not be the first beat that I hit, and even like in the long history of still lives, like to impressionism, like
right.
it's just the saddest thing in the world, just to me, that's just drawing something that's in your studio. And I don't know, I don't know why. I mean it's because I mean I think because anybody that's a trained artist went through a period where that you used that to develop technique, so to then
Right.
return to that says something about that practice of returning to this thing that we all started with.
Right. I mean, I think for me, it's probably because like most of the work is more oriented towards something external, like landscape,
Hmm.
you know, um, and that maybe, I think I'm trying to make something where the landscape and the internal aren't totally separate.
Hmm.
So that happens in that painting, I think.
Yeah.
And it's also a way of thinking maybe about how I'm allowing myself to bring more personal content into the work, in a more overt way than I have done. Not that the work can always have that dimension somehow, but also I think of like the vanitas and the idea of death and all of those the idea of excess and the idea of how the object operates in culture,
Right.
and
Yeah.
so that has been an element in a lot of my work for a while. So I feel like the things that come into my studio are, there's objects, but there's like also so much imagery and um, other kinds of force that are informing these things.
Yeah, and a lot of weight to all of those things. And I think that you're I mean to get back to kind of you're addressing that motherhood's just deep in there. I mean I think that it's in that same category of each of these objects has a history and has a depth to it that you're choosing to incorporate, but your hand also carries that weight. So like how do you talk about that in the same sort of like I mean is it worth pursuing like talking about that in the same kind of language as these things are representative, and so so is the work itself as a representation of you as this multi hyphenate.
Right. I mean, the things that show up appear to say something, I guess. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's almost like trying to figure out like what are they saying? What are they trying to say or
Yeah.
something?
Yeah.
I mean, I think also it came from, I'm surprised when trying to make still, I mean, I don't know if I should even call them still life, but I am surprised that that happened.
Huh.
But part of it, I was talking about this idea of a crisis of the imagination, which is what you titled the program
Uh-huh.
today, right?
Yeah.
And that's definitely part of it too. Is that the thing with motherhood, connecting it back to the kids going to climate marches, right?
Yeah.
Like
Mm-hmm.
that's a really obvious thing that if you're connected with younger generations in any kind of way, you're
Mm-hmm.
just thinking like,
Yeah.
what are we going into,
Yeah. What
and
have we done?
how we're going to kind of change things to survive, right? It's a survival question,
Right.
for humans at least. And I got really inspired by Amitav Ghosh's book, Great Derangement.
Uh-huh.
And in that book, he talked about the idea that the climate crisis is also a crisis of imagination.
Yes.
And he's talking about that in relationship to modernist literature and its history and the problems with like imagining the epic from that perspective. But I felt like that problem also comes into art when you think about certain kinds of like Western ideas about conceptualism, or I don't know, different kinds of ways that art has operated, and
Right.
what it sort of leaves out sometimes, with the difficulty of talking about the epic, because it always gets associated with the sublime,
Hmm.
which is sort of doesn't quite fit with like the climate change picture, right? So
Yeah.
how do we make images of the moment that include all of these dimensions? And that's sort of where, I decided to take that prompt that like I took that book as a challenge,
Hmm.
like this thing of like, how do you grasp this crisis of imagination? So some of the work is really thinking about that.
Yeah.
How do you imagine your way through this?
I haven't read that book, but I love that idea, and I remember Stephanie Ellis, when I was at SFAI, did a lecture. I don't recall what the class was called, but the lecture was with regards to uh, the lack of imagination around 9/11, and then
Mm-hmm.
she proceeded to like cite a bunch of literary examples and film examples, and like to tap off the lecture showed a film clip of Escape from New York, where the president, where Air Force One crashes or whatever on the top of the World
Right.
Trade Centers, and and it was like like the whole point of it was that like the trying to be prepared for a worst case scenario is largely we elect people to make those decisions, to be prepared and to have contingencies and to think through things and to be ready for things. And there are obviously things that are impossible to be ready for, but you can't ever claim that no one could have been ready for it, because artists are constantly imagining these scenarios that are there. It's just a question of like how do you possibly take something like that seriously? And it's like the problem with climate science, over the last 30 years was largely one of, I feel like human beings are convinced it's the people that have immediate things to lose by making big changes to their companies and to their politics. And it was always,
Yeah, we couldn't really be in a much worse political situation
right.
right now.
Yeah.
And that's what's sort of coming out of the whole thing, is that we can't actually rely on leadership, on the federal leadership, obviously.
No, not if there aren't none. Yeah. Without a rule
But
set.
I think I've been thinking about this even more, the sort of notion of dealing with uncertainty since 2016.
Hmm.
I think that there was actually a big shift in my work at that point, because like a lot of my projects up until then, and I'm sure there's still some aspects of this there, but a lot of them were where I'd look at something kind of a history and really think about how that history manifests in the present,
Hmm.
which I think is a really fruitful way to work. But then there's something happened at that moment where I felt like I really had to kind of make work that was speaking in a present tense entirely
Hmm.
somehow. And so there was like this sort of shift in terms of the way I thought about time and these questions. But then, um, you know, I make these things that are like made in my studio by myself, but I also still do these other things that involve talking to a lot of other people.
Hmm.
So, when I came back from Montalvo after the residency, when I moved back into my studio, um, just now, just a month and a half ago or whatever it was, like I looked up on the wall and there's this big. I make these studio notes for myself to put them up on and just to remind myself what's really at stake.
Right.
And there's a big sign that says how to make an uncertainty into power,
Mm.
which was like amazing to walk into at this moment. But it's because I'm working on this. The other project that I'm working on is called Ensemble for Nonlinear Time.
Hmm.
And that's a project that involves lots of fundraising. It's like a video performance project
Right.
that I'm working on with Hope More Dance. And that's all about, having this conversation about uncertainty and rupture with other people. So we have the idea is to bring together. We were specifically thinking about people who have had experiences as refugees, like resettled refugees, and people who lost things in the California fires.
Right.
Because part of what happened in 2016 and this current presidency has made me really worried about isolationism. Also, what's happening in India. I mean, all the places that I'm connected to seem to be. I have a lot of people in London too. So like, there are all these governments that are this isolation of power and this sort of nationalism, the resurgence of that. You know, I really am deeply concerned about that, and I feel like all of my work is about the opposite of that, which is to have this kind of international conversation that isn't corporate, and
right.
It isn't about, you know, kind of globalization. It's about having an international conversation, right?
Yeah.
And so the project was sort of built, like the idea for this project was built in that light, and the idea that if you have people that have lost fire, like the local landscape is this kind of mix, right, of people that have traveled from elsewhere and people that live here, and like the idea of working with those people would be to kind of position them as experts rather than victims, because I think so. It's not a documentary on their experiences. It's about taking people through this series of prompts that it's about exactly the question of how does can rupture become a catalyst for expanding imaginative capacity? So like I'm doing that in my own work and I'm in the paintings, but I'm also trying to do that with other people. And now, so that's like what we're fundraising for, because I won't do that unless I can pay people.
Right.
I mean, all participants have to be like paid to cast. I'm not doing the kind of
exploitive
come participate in my project, but it was so weird to then, because I was like, well, one of the things I should do on my sabbatical while we're fundraising is to test these prompts on myself. And so here we are in the middle of this situation where everyone's experiencing rupture in one way or the other, some versions of it much more extreme, you know, and others, like I'm one of the people who has a house and I'm not sick, and people in my house don't have that particular medical problem. We have some other medical, but whatever, you know. So, yeah, it's just that's sort of where I'm at too. Is like I can actually think about these questions of like, how am I actually processing the rupture? What are the stages of how it cycles? Because the idea. I did one workshop in North Carolina. That was the last thing I did before all of this happened. The last flight was like to North Carolina and back.
Wow.
That was in February, in the end of February, where I was thinking, and I took my daughter, and I was thinking, should we be wearing masks? Like, it was still sort of not quite clear what was happening. Anyway, I did a workshop with some students there, and, you know, one of the things that came out of it was, like actually taking rupture as a character, you know, because in really traumatic experiences, you start to identify with the trauma. Like it starts to become part of you. So if you take it as a character that's actually external on some level, like a force, again, this sort of way of thinking about things as forces as opposed to subject matter, then, you know, you start to think about the way it moves. Because everything's moving and changing all the time. So how does rupture actually move? You know, so that's kind of what I'm like thinking and writing about without actually being able to sit down and make a moving image thing. I think that's where all of that work is going. It's like, but now I'm like, I can do this in a really specific way.
You like touched on so much there. I can't begin to dig in, but I love the biggest mind blowing thing that you said was talking to refugees because they're the experts is such a embarrassingly backward thing to hear. But it is so 100% the truth of it is that the people that are developing policies are so far removed from any expertise.
Well, they're actually
on the subject.
I mean, the federal administration is anti-expertise.
Yeah, of course.
And running on a whole platform of I'm great because I have no experience.
Right, but also anybody else that's a part of the conversation equally has the same experience. Like listening doesn't give you expertise. Going through it gives you expertise.
Right,
You
right,
know,
exactly.
and
Yeah, because physical knowledge, it's if you can find a way to access that without re-traumatizing, which is,
yeah,
I mean, I don't know, it's a tricky
man,
thing, but
and I love that.
but
Um,
yeah, no, I'm really into the idea of actually like we're not listening to the right people.
I
I
mean,
mean,
I think this,
obviously, we're not listening to the scientists. That's a big, glaring thing. But I think there's also a lot of other people that have not been listened to.
yeah,
Most colonized subjects have not been listened to.
yeah. Well,
Um,
and also like to your idea of rupture, there's something about artists being um, being able to choose the medium, and the idea that you would make this active choice to participate in this other project in a really different way than you participate in image, or generating fresh image is intriguing to me, and not just because of the situation. I think I'm always intrigued by that, but I love the idea of you know artists largely have the skill set to like assess a situation and decide, oh, I am not the best person to lead this. I'm not the this thing that I'm working on isn't the smartest way to address this. And like there's so many examples of artists turning something that started as a mural project and it ended up being legislation, or it ended up being it goes so far into another direction, or it ends up becoming a television show, or it ends up this book that I wrote about this hobby that I have has now become what I what my life is like. There was a filmmaker that was talking about how they became less interested in film and more interested in podcasting and lecturing, because that's what they were trying to do with film anyway, but they weren't
right,
nearly as good at it as they were just write to somebody, like
right.
trying to express ideas in the wrong way. And I love that that recalibration, and I'm really interested in seeing what happens with that project, or
Yeah,
just
I am too. I
continue
mean,
to.
it's definitely like I had this feeling that I wanted to push the things that were happening in the animation within the things that I was doing with the collaboration with the choreographer.
Uh-huh.
And that's definitely an instance where I felt like I really wanted to work with someone that had a real expertise in working with the body too.
Oh, okay.
Like, and having, physical expression be part of it, like the somatic dimension of that. And then, you know, it's also like letting myself do a project that might take 5 years or something.
Right.
I've been working on this like quick schedule, like, just fast, not, I mean, relatively quick production for a long time.
Uh-huh.
And so I wanted to like make the time to do something that would like, yeah, allow me to actually pay people and do production in a certain kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
But like really also really work with people, like what would that look like? So I don't know. I named it an ensemble because I was like, that's what I actually want to make.
Right.
Like for my part, what I want to make is the ensemble itself,
Yeah.
and then we'll see like what it makes.
Right.
But yeah.
So
Yeah.
so to swing back to the topic, the crisis of imagination. I mean, do you feel like oh yeah, that was the other thing that you hit on, that the quote. What was the quote that you wrote on your uncertainty is power?
Oh yeah, it says how to make uncertainty into power. I'm just looking at it now.
Right. I mean, there's something really wonderful about that being a reverse, the reverse of crisis of imagination. Like, how do you take imagination and turn it into the thing that makes your work powerful, or like I guess do you feel like you use that quote in your work, in your life? Are you just something to constantly keep in mind?
I'm trying to remember now why I wrote that. Because I mean, I was working in that. I do get really upset by things that are happening.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's when I usually end up writing one of these notes. But I think it was about like, I think it's really similar as, the idea that this sort of the climate situation and the situation with sort of isolationist political regimes. I see those things as being really entangled,
Yeah.
and so there isn't how to. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's something about like how to learn. I don't know. Listen to the uncertainty. Like I did this whole project at the DeRosa that was bringing the dancers. This came out of a project at the DeRosa where I brought dancers into the remnants of the fires up north, and they were improvising in the leftover wood, like all the ash. Part of that was about just like making an image of ways of actually touching the ground, being really physically involved with this landscape as an important step towards understanding how to move forward. I think it's something to do with that. I mean, I think that my thought about that changes every day, but this whole idea of like how the rupture can be a transformative a lot of people are talking about that right now. Like, how is this rupture going to is there an opportunity for transformation?
Right.
How do you take that opportunity? Right. Where are the spaces where you can kind of,
Right.
Where is it powerful? Where is like you have much more time to understand yourself in this situation also.
Yeah. Or I mean, I feel like there's so many people that I know that are, that have had no choice but to reassess everything. Like this was a, there are those in my circles that have been operating at like 110% for a decade, and to be forced into a situation where they're, where they're everything that they were working on is just all of a sudden way less important, and now the things that I'm that presumably that they're working on are like this opportunity to revisit all these things that have been on the wayside, or
right. Right.
Given partial time.
Yeah.
A lot of people talking about cooking.
The way that there's also a way that like there's so many things, very basic things like health and childcare and labor and all of the things that are kind of coming up as being really big problems.
Right.
Were clearly have been problems for a very long time, or actually being focused on a certain way.
Yeah.
The definition of the essential is changing. I mean, all of those kinds of things. But, I don't know the answer to that question. I think that's like I think it's like a question that's related to like, what capacity does art have also?
Yeah.
Because I think art is always about the unknown.
Right.
Right? Like that's like at the heart of it. And I think it's about preserving the unknown too. Like not explaining everything away. It's not entirely founded on like rationality.
Yeah. Well, it's also what sets us apart from other mammals, I mean, like the tool building kind of picks up in some other advanced animals, but the ability to design a tool to do something that serves no purpose is uniquely ours, and it puts us in this position of constant challenge of ourselves and the rest of our species. And
Yeah,
I
I
love
mean, I'm
I
maybe, although I'm like also looking at a lot of like non-human agencies and kind of wondering about those ideas too. Like the banyan tree strangles its host, and I guess that has a purpose because it gives the tree a foundation.
right.
But then it's like it's maybe it's not the same as is that tool making for no. I mean, we assume that it all has a purpose, I guess, in nature.
Right.
I'm not sure whether we our tools also don't have always a purpose, but we don't always know what they are.
Right.
Or I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure about the kind of human other species divisions, but that's sort of
Right.
you know,
I guess
my other collaborator and I are making a project all about the idea of the octopus with an artificial intelligence, like based on the biology of the creature.
yeah.
So I'm kind of steeped in that, you know,
I guess
this thing.
I guess I was generalizing to kind of point out that like there are those of us that obsess about generating poetry and generating you know non life sustaining
Yeah.
you know non life sustaining mechanisms for each other, and that's a very
it's not directly like just sustaining, but I'm not sure it doesn't have something with survival actually. I'm not sure art doesn't actually have something to do with survival. That's what I'm saying.
I mean, those of us this light that's coming on you is fantastic. Those of
It's the sun. That is the sun.
that is amazing. I mean, I think those of us there are those of us that could not survive without art making, without this, you know, taking one idea and transforming it into another.
Mm-hmm.
And I get really excited about that. I think, God, man, was that the first episode of this show? I'm trying to think of when that conversation happened. Well, I won't reference it then. But I mean, yeah, the idea that like we're absorbing culture and retooling it in our brains and representing it in a way that tries at its heart to get others to look at that same culture through a different lens. You know, through whatever that is.
Yeah, and to kind of flesh out some dimensions of being that aren't so easily accessible in like set the data-driven environment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, we're living in the kind of total everything's so instrumentalized, and I mean, there's sort of like a very narrow representation of being that's about really. I don't know what I would do without having other kinds of images and ideas and poetry to draw on, you know.
Yeah, you are an incredible critic of the world by doing that. You know, I think artists in general find that place.
Yeah. I hope so, or at least try to. I mean, you make space for this stuff to happen too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And there must be you know, you're. I guess you could say that what you're doing with aggregate space, you're doing for no reason, but I just don't believe that.
It's not. I mean, it's because that I no reason is extremely subjective, and it comes from how I choose to paraphrase what others think of what we're doing.
Right.
It's not what I think.
Yeah.
I in my head am in a constant defense of these things.
Right.
And
you also have to.
It leaks out.
To fund it, you have to explain why it's useful.
Right. But yeah, that is constantly oozing out in my lack of language, my low bar language skills and.
Oh, that machine is so hard though, because you write one of those grants and then you're like, what a bunch of bullshit. Like, if this isn't useful, like, what am I talking about? You know?
Oh man, I think. Well, I've been on Yeah, right. It's the same thing with what you like retooling your resume for a job,
Yeah.
or like retooling an existing essay to fit the guidelines of a new essay that's like needs to be like 1,000 words longer, and
Oh
so it's like you
yeah.
start like dumping language in I don't know. I don't know if that's how you edit, but I feel like I end up having to then reread the thing. Like it would have been better if I just started from scratch because then I'm
Started from
rereading the
scratch.
thing.
I think I've starting from scratch instead of trying to do that.
That's smart.
Um,
But with grants,
yeah.
it's like some of it's so useful.
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, with the ensemble project, we've written a bunch of things lately, and we're not starting from scratch every time. There is some language that like can be migrated.
Okay, that's great. This is so great. I can't believe it's been an hour already. That's
I
like
know, it's so
absolutely
fun
incredible.
talking.
Yeah. I thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it, and
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for
I
making
hope yeah,
space and time for lots of artists.
I hope I shook something loose. I don't.
Yeah, it was good.
If
It's good to
not,
talk.
we'll see. And I'll dig up that quote. It is a really good quote if I could find it.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm looking forward to hearing it.
so
What's
again,
this writer again?
oh, Brian Greene. Yeah, he
Okay.
wrote Elegant Universe and what's the other one? I have all of them. They're floating around here. They're in this room. That's why I'm looking around. But yeah, it's a good one. Thank you so much for being here again. I really
Fine.
appreciate you. And good luck with all your projects and most
Yeah.
importantly, motherhood and your painting practice. And I really am excited to see that ensemble piece. So
Cool.
thank you, Renu.
Where you too. Bye.
Bye bye. Wow, that was a really fast episode. Thank you, Ranu Mukherjee, for joining me. What a breath of fresh air on during this period. Um, Next episode, I will be talking with Jesse Hewitt, dance performer, chef, all around absolute incredible human being. I hope you join me on the next episode of This New Idea.